with us. She is a writer and senior lecturer in creative writing, specialising in experimental and political poetry and fiction at the University of Essex. She is a member of the UCU Essex branch, and she's going to give us a talk, I believe, from a UCU perspective. So, welcome, Miss Holly.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll be talking as a UCU rep and also as an educator working in university, talking about language and language being the focus of my discipline, and also the kind of medium through which I educate not children but young people. And there are kind of children. But maybe one day you can come, and then I've done a bit of recruitment today. So yeah, thinking about, they're not young people, but there's various kind of conversations around the duty of care that university lecturers have towards students now. And I have kind of ideas about that, but we do have a kind of pastoral sense of responsibility to student well-being and student health, as well as their happiness, safety, and as well as their kind of flourishing, thriving education and future. So that's the kind of context I'll be talking through, and I don't have an answer to the question. I hope that I'm so grateful to kind of be in a room with these people and you all, and just have a reason to kind of come together and talk, because that just not having space to talk about this, I think, just as someone who thinks of themselves as caring and politically active, can feel so, well, yeah, it can kind of drive you to burnout. So I'm grateful. Thank you so much. It's such a privilege actually to kind of be given space to talk. So I have 3 points, and I'll kind of crack on with them now. My first point is, yes, the environment that I'm teaching in is a university. The universities these days are quite neoliberally managed. I have found immediately, from October the 7th onwards, there was a kind of overarching feeling of censorship, and there was an environment was created where it felt like talking about atrocity in Gaza was taboo, and it was amazing how that kind of seeped into my colleagues and our general kind of attitudes. There weren't any frameworks or guidance of what you can and can't talk about. There wasn't support, but there was a kind of managed culture of nervousness around talking about Gaza and genocide and the history of the occupation and apartheid. When students and some student-led campaign started, where they immediately wanted to do some protest work and acts of solidarity for Palestine, there was an email about kind of anti-terrorist laws and Hamas, and it was like that. The students didn't even mention this; they were talking very much about kind of vigils and solidarity. So that was the kind of tone. And I think even though many lecturers were kind of against that tone, the effect was a silencing. And I can feel a reluctance in my colleagues to talk about it. I've talked with other colleagues about this kind of wince that you get if you bring it up, and you start using these kind of quite damaging euphemisms, like it's just hard to do this with everything that's going on. And I think those euphemisms are really dangerous as well, and I try to train myself out of that kind of abstract language. But the minute you do use it, you get this kind of, yeah, I know, and it's like this wince, and it's like, but can you stop talking about it, because I'm suddenly uncomfortable and it's very difficult. And I've tried to kind of like train myself. It's very hard to do the job that we've got to do while there's a genocide going on. You know, like I want to use the concrete language. I want to recognise what's happening. So this kind of environment of reluctance among my staff, I found I was so, I've been so helped by my union having such a concrete position, a ceasefire, a call for ceasefire, and that kind of collective representation of a position I found is just the most effective, productive, reassuring, empowering way, that kind of mechanism that I don't have to, I can just put the posters on my all over my office now, because the UCU provided these posters, these ceasefire posters, and it's like, so that kind of pressure on the individual is eased, and that's really important to kind of remember that, and that's that kind of collective empowering mechanisms are what is so important. And that reminds me, like it reminded me as an individual, regardless of the kind of dynamic of adult, child, educator, student, this is just a human thing that we are tacitly learning from each other's response all the time. You look to the people you respect, and you are informed by their response. So everyone is looking to each other in terms of how to respond. So by not saying anything, you are tacitly saying it doesn't matter, or that it's not an important issue. Even if a kind of like a sensitive silence is still an expression of whatever's happening isn't important. So the idea of that kind of tacit silence and tacit code stating that it doesn't matter, it's just not an option for me. It's just not an option as an educator, and I couldn't kind of talk about language and speech and be kind of performing that kind of silence. So I was grateful to my union, first of all, for giving me that kind of collective voice. So taking me to a second point about poetry and kind of taking this into the classroom, I've been talking much more about political poetry and the role of poetry in revolutionary consciousness and history of revolution. And I remind my students that when we're learning poetry, we are paying attention to language like we are never usually. We get kind of politicians speak, we get media speaking, where we are with poetry, it's like the antidote to that. Politicians will obscure the massacre of children, and the media will obscure that. And so you can bring in like headlines that say, a young woman found dead, like it's a 6-year-old was murdered, this is a 6-year-old girl was murdered. So we kind of unpick that through poetry is a method to kind of resist and fight back the taking over of your own consciousness to the suffering of other people. So this is how we use poetry in my classroom, and it is work, because I don't know how people feel, but I do find students have been conditioned to behave in their thinking. There is a kind of learned behaviour to perform well, right? They don't know, they don't have the confidence in the methods to challenge, to speculate, to question power, to be incendiary in any way, you know, and poetry is permission, I say, to kind of to do that. And it's like, again, poetry in the union, these are my kind of frameworks to kind of, this is not me telling you to think this, this is like a framework through which you can answer with your consciousness. So yeah, we look at the media headlines, we look at the death, we look at the murder of Najib, and we talk about the language used around her. And we can use poetry, the Palestinian poet, of course, If I'm the Sky provides this kind of immediate context. We can go back, there's a history of Palestinian poetry that provides kind of historical context. There are 2 poems that I use quite a lot that aren't from Palestine, but one is by Audre Lorde, a political poet, and it's called Sisters in Arms, and another poem that people might know, Masks of Anarchy by Shelley. And these are both poems written by Lorde and Shelley, written in response to hearing news from outside that affects them. So it's a really nice tool. Audre Lorde's poem, Sisters in Arms, is about hearing the death of a child in apartheid South Africa. And Shelley's poem about hearing the Pizzoli massacre in the 19th century. So these are really useful tools to say, this is how these poets, they're capturing that moment where you're just like lying in bed, or you're just scrolling through your phone, and you are just like, you're just scrolling through trusty. And you're allowed to respond to that moment, and these are kind of these like Mass Anarchy is like this hugely famous poem, and and also just an amazing work that I love talking about. It's called the Gaza Monologues by the Ashton Theatre. And it began in 2010 in the attacks on Gaza in 2010, where the monologues, the testimonies of young children between 6 and 12 were captured and turned into what's called an ongoing work of theatre. And it's really good because these monologues have been translated into dozens and dozens of languages, and the theatre, Ashton Theatre, invites everyone to perform them at any moment, and that is the theatre space. It lives on in each other, it lives on in history. So it's this ongoing work of theatre, and it's the stories of children, and it provides this kind of really important contextual narrative of the suffering of children and at the time, like many of the children who wrote these monologues, they all now be young people, like in their 20s, don't know what's happening to them or what happened to them, but these monologues kind of exist as a kind of archive of this that we can kind of carry on performing. So I really, if anybody wants to kind of a link to these monologues, I would really love to share them. And whenever you read them to each other, you are performing them. You are performing the theatre. You are the theatre. So it continues. I think that kind of work is so important. And I think I'll stop